She stood before 15,000 people in Madison Square Garden. The year was 1962, and in that single moment, wearing a dress so sheer it looked like it had been painted directly onto her skin, Marilyn Monroe changed the definition of glamour forever. That breathy, barely there rendition of Happy Birthday, Mr. President became one of the most iconic performances in American history. But here's what nobody talks about. The dress she wore that night, 6,000 hand-stitched crystals, skin-tight, flesh-toned silk, stitched so close to her body she had to be sewn into it, is locked inside a vault right now. No public display, no museum lighting, just sealed away, somewhere only a handful of people in the world know how to find. And it cost one man $4.8 million to make sure it stays that way. The dress that rewrote fashion history. To understand why someone would spend nearly $5 million on a single garment, you have to understand what that dress actually was. Jean-Louis, the Hollywood costume designer behind some of the most memorable looks in cinema history, created it specifically for one night, one woman, one moment. It wasn't designed to last decades. It wasn't designed to become the most expensive dress ever sold at auction. It was designed to be worn once in front of the President of the United States and disappear back into the velvet darkness of a changing room. The gown weighed only 7 pounds. It contained no lining. The flesh-colored silk was so thin, so deliberately transparent under stage lighting, that Monroe famously had nothing underneath. Photographs from that evening at Madison Square Garden show the crystals catching every beam of spotlight, turning her silhouette into something that looked less like clothing and more like liquid starlight poured over a human form. Fashion historians have spent decades arguing about whether any single piece of clothing has ever wielded more cultural power than that dress did. In those 3 minutes she stood at the microphone after that night, it disappeared. Monroe died just 3 months later, in August 1962. The dress passed through private hands, sat in storage, almost faded from memory entirely. Then the auction houses found it, the auction that stunned the world. When Ripley's Believe It or Not acquired the dress at auction in 2016 for $4.8 million, the fashion world collectively stopped breathing for a moment. This wasn't a record for a vintage garment sold quietly between collectors. This was a public spectacle. The number shattered every previous record for a piece of celebrity clothing ever sold at auction. For context, that figure exceeded the annual GDP of several small island nations. It bought more than fabric and crystals. It bought a piece of living American mythology. But Ripley's wasn't finished making headlines. What happened next sparked genuine outrage in preservation circles and fascinated observers in equal measure. In 2022, they loaned the dress to Kim Kardashian to wear at the Met Gala. The images went viral within minutes. Kardashian had crash-dieted to fit into the garment, losing 16 pounds in 3 weeks. She wore it for less than 5 minutes on the red carpet before changing into a replica. Textile experts and fashion historians responded with alarm. Crystals had visibly fallen. The delicate seam showed stress. A garment that had survived 6 decades in relative peace had suddenly become the center of a global conversation about what luxury ownership actually means and what responsibility it carries. The vault. This is where the story takes a turn most people don't know about. Today, the dress lives in what Ripley's describes as a climate-controlled, high-security environment. Temperature regulated to the precise degree. Humidity levels monitored constantly. Human contact reduced to an absolute minimum. The very hands that touched it, stitched it, wore it, are now considered a threat to its survival. Cotton gloves are mandatory. Exposure to light is limited. The crystals that caught Kennedy's gaze in 1962 are now shielded from almost all light sources to prevent deterioration. The vault itself is not a place you visit on a Tuesday afternoon. There is no lobby, no tour, no velvet rope and informational placard. This is preservation taken to its logical extreme, a level of protection reserved for objects the world has collectively decided are too important to risk. Fragile documents, irreplaceable artworks, and now one 7-pound dress made of silk and 6,000 hand-sewn crystals. The paradox is almost beautiful in its absurdity. The most famous dress in American fashion history is hidden. The very thing that made it legendary, being seen, being photographed, being worn on one of the most watched evenings in American cultural life. Knock is now precisely what it is protected against. If you're watching this and thinking, There's no way one piece of clothing justifies that kind of money to keep watching. Because what was paid for wasn't just a dress, it was something far more interesting than that. What $4.8 million actually buys people who don't operate in the world of ultra-luxury collecting often make a simple mistake. They evaluate objects like the Monroe dress through the lens of function. A dress is for wearing, a car is for driving, a painting is for looking at. By that logic, $4.8 million for a garment that now lives behind a sealed vault door sounds irrational, almost offensive. But the ultra-wealthy don't buy objects for their function. They buy them for their gravity. The Monroe dress generates news coverage, documentary segments, and global conversation without ever leaving its vault. Its existence as a privately held piece of history gives its owner a cultural footprint that no advertising campaign could replicate. When Ripley's made headlines around the world in 2022, it wasn't because of a new attraction or a new acquisition. It was because of a dress locked in a vault. There are fewer than 10 objects on Earth that carry the kind of instant, universal recognition that dress commands. It requires no explanation in any language. Show the image and within seconds people know. That kind of cultural shorthand is not manufactured. It cannot be commissioned. It can only be purchased carefully when the auction hammer falls at exactly the right moment. The preservation debate, not everyone agrees with locking it away. Textile historians argue passionately that objects of cultural significance belong in institutions where they can be studied, where the public can encounter them. There is a serious ongoing conversation in the museum world about who gets to own history and under what terms. The Monroe dress sits at the center of that debate in a way that makes academics deeply uncomfortable. Others counter that without private buyers willing to spend extraordinary sums. Pieces like this would deteriorate in storage rooms nobody funds properly. The money that comes with high-profile private ownership funds, the conservation technology, the climate controls, the specialists who monitor these objects around the clock. There is no simple answer. The dress was not going to a publicly funded national museum regardless. The question was always, which private owner would take responsibility for it? What is beyond debate is that the object has survived. 60-plus years after Monroe was sewn into it backstage at Madison Square Garden, the crystals are still intact. The seams are still holding. The silk, though fragile, endures. Whatever you think about the vault, about the ownership, about the Met Gala controversy, the dress exists. And that is not nothing. True luxury is buying history. There is a particular kind of wealth that does not express itself in size or volume. No need for the longest yacht or the tallest tower. This kind of wealth reaches backward through time, acquires something irreplaceable, and simply holds onto it. The $4.8 million paid for that dress was not payment for fabric. It was payment for the moment. For the gasp of 15,000 people, for 3 minutes at a microphone that rewrote American glamour, for every photograph ever taken of every woman who ever tried, consciously or not, to hold a room the way Marilyn Monroe held a room that night in 1962. The dress is in its vault. The crystals are in darkness. And somewhere in the ledger of one of the most unusual companies on Earth, it sits as an asset, valued, insured, and completely, deliberately invisible. That is what $4.8 million buys when you are wealthy enough to buy history. Not the right to show it, the right to keep it. If this story made you see luxury differently, subscribe, because next week we're going inside another vault, another fortune, and another object the world thought it would never see again.